Hello, Barons. Now imagine having a passion for engineering, design and sport, being able to combine these every day in your working life, and in doing so rubbing shoulders with heroes past, present and emerging. And this is the life our next guest lives. And out of jealousy and pure spite, I'll bring this podcast to a close. Thanks for just because that's my only joke. Tomo, so it gives me great pleasure to welcome to GolfBarons, in fact, back to GolfBarons, Senior Director of Product Creation. Is that right?
That's correct, yep.
For Taylormade, Flusher, and I've said here all-round nice guy, and that's to be disputed, but we'll see how we go.
Yeah.
Mr. Tomo Bystedt, welcome back. Tomo, how are you going?
Great, doing fantastic. Good to be back on again. I don't know if I'm the first repeat guest, but if I am, that'd be great. But definitely
I'll tell you that
talk
you are.
again. Okay.
That's right. As far as you know, you're the first repeat guest. In
exactly,
fact, our only other repeat guest actually hails from Chicago, is also hails from the Gold Coast. Actually hails from Melbourne. That's a long story. Now, where have you been? And do you know where you are now? Because I know we've caught you at the end of a busy work trip, so thanks for your time.
Yeah.
But where are you and where were you? And where were you before that?
This is not New York City. It looks a bit like it in the background. I'm in Carlsbad, California, in my office here in what we call the vault at Taylormade. So,
have you got a big door?
My office door is normal, but then the door outside of my office door is fairly chunky. Yes, but we this is where designers and our product creation team sort of do our magic and come up with cool stuff. And yeah, this is my office. You see a couple things I have in my office in the background: coffee machine, Formula One helmet, some club heads, standard stuff. And you also asked me, where have I been? So I'm happy to report that started traveling again. I definitely got a little cabin fever there for a while during COVID, and I'm so used to traveling a lot, as you know, Phil. And I kind of part of it is like doing what I do and working on product. I need to see people. I need to see how our product's working in the field and get feedback and just kind of get a sense of the industry and how everything's going. And being stuck here is not ideal. So it started off, end of last year with a little bit more domestic travel. I was traveling around the U.S., Florida, Pittsburgh. I went to Oregon, just in a couple local trips, and then and I was in Dallas as well. And then this spring started to do some international travel. Actually, last fall I was in the UK back in December as we were kind of getting ready for stealth launch for Europe. And then most recently, I've been to. I was up at Pebble Beach for a little bit, played a little bit of golf there. We had some events, and then I was also up at the Masters for the first time. All these years later, unbelievable to be at the Masters. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that was incredible. And then I just got back from Japan, as you suggested there. I've been just on the back of about a week-long trip to Japan, so which is fantastic too. Obviously, have family there, and I've lived there in the past, and so being able to go back and reconnect for a little bit was great. So that's kind of my travel for the last 6 months.
And what have you discovered most recently about your travels before we get on to Augusta, because we need to?
It's a little bit more difficult to get around nowadays, especially internationally with the COVID testing before, where you're there, and all the little apps you have to download, and in some cases get special visas. So all of that is a little bit of hassle, but it's definitely worth it. Obviously, one of the nice things is, and generally speaking, not in the U.S. so much, but internationally, the airports are much less busy. So just being in the airport, it's a lot of space, not a lot of jostling around. So that's been nice. But it feels like it's returning back to normal a little bit. Most places, not everywhere, but most places.
Well, Australia, look forward to welcoming you back then. Now, how was Augusta? Because I didn't know this was your first time. I know you were heading there, but I just assumed that you'd been on that junket before.
Yeah.
Talk me through Augusta from the first step towards around what you learned about it, what you didn't know, and what surprised you.
I think like everyone who goes for the first time, especially if you're in the golf business, as long as I've been in the golf business and being just a golfer, expectations are pretty high. You know, you've seen it on TV so many years and it looks immaculate on TV. And I think there's a combination of having high expectations and then slightly expecting to be let down. Like, yeah, it can't be as good as it looks, surely. You know, it's like they show the camera angles, they're all like flattering angles of the course, etc. And then where you can't see is like a pile of dead leaves or something. So I had that same situation. But for me, it was, you know, it was one of those quite late on. It wasn't that long ago that I found out that I was going, first of all. So that was a nice surprise. And you know, obviously with work, we do have a lot of activities going on there. We have a house every year. Our tour staff stays there servicing the players early in the week. And then we do bring in some customers towards the end of the week to go to the tournament. So I was just lucky to be able to get a spot this time. And maybe because I've asked about 12 years in a row to go. Yeah. So might have had something to do with it. So, you know, arriving there, it was, the experience right off the plane was amazing. First of all, you touch down in Augusta airport and there's a sea of private jets. I mean, that was the first thing. I was like, there was like 50 private jets just sitting there on the tarmac, which was pretty cool. The airport is tiny. The airport building looks like a clubhouse appropriately. So it's just,
you mean literally looks like a clubhouse?
Yeah, like the actual structure of it, and inside it looks like a bit like there's a pro shop over here, like a cafe over. It's like literally like a pro shop. So it was quite interesting. But the whole experience, like driving in there, was definitely like you were in a little bit of a different place. The town is quite unassuming, as you know, and but actually nice. Like I'd heard maybe that it wasn't so nice, but I actually like that town. But really that first morning arriving on the grounds. First of all, like I didn't have a sense of the scale of sort of the, you know, the parking and just the size of the event. You kind of see the Magnolia Lane on TV and you expect to like, oh, I'm just going to drive up Magnolia Lane and I'll get dropped off. And it's like, no. Like only players go up that way. We get into the massive parking center that they have just off the side. But it became pretty obvious right away that you were not at a normal golf tournament. You know, I think I've been to a lot of U.S. Opens, Open Championships, regular tour events here, and this was like not anything like those things. Other than there were a lot of people there. You know, everything is quite organized, and I think people are on better behavior generally. I think just because the fear of getting kicked out is quite high.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a sense of familiarity. As soon as you walk in, you're like, oh, I know that hole, and I know. Yes. But then it also looks different. You know, it's like that strange thing of, well, I expected that to look like this or whatever, and just the space is so much more open than I thought it was going to be. Just walking through that kind of first little chute through the trees, and you kind of emerge at the scoreboard and sort of that beginning of the first fairway, and that part is very kind of different. Like I didn't realize how the holes were interconnected necessarily. I've seen all the holes individually, but I think the first thing that struck me, and I think it strikes everyone that walks in there, is first of all, how incredibly busy the merchandise store is. There's a 200-yard long line just to get in there. And then when you get in there, it's like the mother of all super spreader events. I mean, you're next to a bunch of people with no masks, and it was like pretty claustrophobic, but they have incredible product there. So you have to go in there, you have to do it. But then as you walk onto the golf course, it's just as good as you have ever thought it was going to be. The grass is immaculate everywhere. I think just looking down at the grass, it looks different than grass that I've seen before. It's more dense. It has this sort of almost like carpet quality to it where you can't see any of the dirt. It's just like tiny bits of grass woven together. Seems very durable, which is like all those walkways across the fairways, which you end up going across quite a bit, look the same as the rest of the fairway. Even though thousands of people have been walking across it, there's no sign of sort of it developing any kind of wear or dirt showing or anything like that, like you would get at every other event. Even at links courses, you get that at the Open and things like that. And then, you know, the little touches, like the guys on the tee boxes. So par 3 holes, they tee off, divots go flying, grass. I mean, there's guys meticulously replacing divots. There's guys with like the vacuum cleaner picking up all the little bits of dust, so that the next group comes up, it's like a pristine tee box again with no leaves or any kind of of that
So during
inconvenience
the tournament,
happening.
so while they're playing, the vacuum cleaner guys are there.
Yeah.
Oh, and girls, sorry. Vacuum cleaner people.
Yeah, and they're picking up all little bits of things. And actually, I saw we were on the 12th hole for a little bit on the Saturday, and we saw people. When a decent sized divot came up, there was a guy who was like giving the divot to somebody sitting behind there. You want to take it home? It's a little souvenir from Augusta.
Wow.
They probably asked for it, but it was I thought it was quite funny.
They've been asking for it every year for 12 years, Tomo.
Yeah, exactly. And then I was kind of slightly upset I didn't bring a Ziploc bag because I thought that would have been a cool souvenir. Tiger's divot on 12 in a Ziploc bag in my house. I'm not sure how I would have kept it, but I probably would have somehow frozen it or something. I don't know. But that would have been cool.
Or sown it into your front lawn and then found any good patch in 2 years later. If a new nice patch emerges, that was Tiger's divot.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it had died long ago, but it doesn't matter. It's all about
that's Tiger's divot right there. Yeah. So it was fantastic. And I think the other thing too, which was great, that I hadn't really I hadn't researched it too much before going, is sort of how to spectate, where to go, what you see and everything like that. But I was really impressed with how orderly everything was, despite there being a lot of people there. And then the whole chair system where you kind of, you get a master's chair and you put it down somewhere at the beginning of the day, and you can just leave it there and then come back to it later on and just sit, so you can get a good spot, and no one will sit in your chair or take your chair away or move it or anything like that. It'll just stay there untouched. You got to put your little name in the back of the chair or whatever. But I thought that was fantastic. It's just, you can go put your chair on 12T and then you go and watch some other golf somewhere else. And then you come back a couple hours later, your chair's still there, right next to the tee box, and you get a good view, and you don't have to jostle for position or be 7 rows back.
So do they have a Le Mans start then at the start of the day where everyone lines up with their chairs?
There's a little bit of that.
12T?
But you're not allowed to run at Augusta. So you got to walk. All these
power walkers.
Yes. But it's honestly, it's not you'd think it'd be just a stampede at the beginning.
Yeah.
But you can get good spots even if you show up, half an hour later or whatever. It's it's not like you're going to be there at 8:01 or whatever when the gates open. And also what I did, for example, I didn't really plan ahead, so I wasn't sure that I didn't do that. First of all, I didn't go there at the beginning and run to the 12th tee or walk quickly to the 12th tee. I actually bought a chair at noon. And then I just waited for some of the people that had chairs there earlier to leave and take their chairs with them. And then I swooped in and I put my chair in where they opened up a spot,
The chair swoop.
Yeah. And it's super easy and not again, if you just pay attention a little bit, again, you can get a great seat. And so we had, Saturday, we had front row seats essentially at 11th green, 12th tee, and you kind of see them teeing off on 13, which was, really special.
And what hole, having played it, forgetting the whole course, what hole would you say, if you weren't allowed to play all of Augusta, but you could play one hole, what hole would you choose?
I would definitely play 13. I would probably play it horribly because I can't draw the ball anymore, but it'd be really fun to try. It would be really fun to try. That hole looks so fun and tough, but not impossible to play. So, I would love to play 13.
So for you attempting to draw it on 13, would you look Scheffler-esque? Can I ask that question? Is that your draw swing?
A little bit. I would look a little out of control in the follow through for sure, because I'd be trying to turn it over with a 3-wood or something, or maybe a driver. I don't know. I'm not sure because obviously I don't hit as far as those guys, so I probably need a driver just to get to the corners. I might try to hit a draw with a driver, which would be quite hilarious, and then hopefully get into a playable spot where I could hit something at the green. That would be the goal.
But of all of them, 13 of all the holes, 13 is the one where I'd like to have a crack at that. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it because it's completely unique to anything else that you've played?
I think so. I think it's just a very unique hole, and I think it's the one, at least for me, when I think back on having watched the Masters since Sandy Lyle won, I've watched every single one, and so that's the one that it just pops into my mind. If I think Masters, I think of all the drama that's happened in that hole and the different shots that people hit off the tee and those second shots going in and people going in the water and all that. So that would be the one. And obviously 12 is cool, but I would have picked 12, except I only really get to hit one shot.
Yes,
so.
that's right. You're going to hole it.
Yeah. So it's only one full swing, hopefully, on that one. So, but that one, I actually watching people play that hole was fascinating. In person and watching the different shots, the trajectories. You don't really get a sense of that on TV of sort of how high people bring it in versus lower, and how kind of intimidating that right side of the green is. Because I always felt watching on TV, it's like, why can't they just go for the pin? What's the big deal? This hole, it's 150 yards, 160 yards, but it's quite scary looking hole from where you stand behind the tee. So it was cool to watch them, and just how hard it is, because people weren't hitting it close. I mean, at least when I was watching, people were hitting it long left, and some people like almost on the bridge on the left, and then a couple in the water. It was pretty dramatic.
So when you've watched the 30 for 30 with Shark, do you now understand a little bit more of his? Have you seen that? Sorry, is the first.
I haven't seen it. No.
Oh, you haven't seen it yet. Oh, well, when you watch it, you'll understand his meltdown on 12. You'll be able to start to say, I can actually see how that happened, because it's interesting for a 150-yard hole.
Yeah.
With the distance control these guys have, Kipper speaks about and thought it was his secret, as we spoke about in our Masters Rap podcast, that the secret of the wins that he was told by Stevie Williams, the secret of the wins on 12, whereby it swoops up 11 but also back down 13, and it pulls. And so you actually just never know where the wind's going, and you have to look in 15 different directions to try and then have a guess to understand why 12 is so difficult. Because given their distance control, I mean, you could give them a 150-yard shot and they're going to be plus or minus. I mean, you've spent time with them. What are out of 10 shots, they're plus or minus how many yards?
3, probably.
Three. Yet all of a sudden,
4 yards, yeah.
Yet all of a sudden, they're hitting roping hook, 30-yard left hooks, 20-yard block cuts.
Exactly.
It just makes them hit shots that they're not there.
Yeah.
Are you heading to the Open?
Probably not.
Okay. You're back on. We can continue this podcast. Because I was about to get very upset. Now,
I'm not sure. I don't think so. And I think part of it is we're strangely like, and kind of the cadence of the golf industry and product launch. It's like there's really no downtime nowadays. It used to be sort of like, it gets busy at the end of the year and the beginning of the year, and then you've got this like little bit of breathing space. But now there's so many things going on with just our business and things like that. And unless I have a really good business reason to go to the Open, as much as I'd love to go to St. Andrews again, probably not going to happen. Plus, I at some point need to take some vacation too. So that's probably going to be around that time.
Yeah, the Open seems like a reasonable vacation.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe we all view things a little bit differently depending on how close we are to it. Now a little bit of history. Now I want to take you back to a day that you've described as one of the greatest days of your life. And it was playing the St. Andrews Beach golf course in Melbourne, designed by Tom Doak. Now,
great track.
In fact, it's not just the whole course. The first hole, I just want you to take us through the first hole at St. Andrews Beach golf course, because, as I say, this was monumental for you. Give me your memories of the hole, the weather conditions on the day, and why, for all our listeners and viewers, they would possibly think I'd be bringing this up.
Yeah. So I had been in Australia for about a week at that time.
Correct.
I just arrived and just started my job at Taylormade Australia. And I think the main purpose of this whole, me playing there at all, was it was like a welcome to Australia, Tomo. Thank you for being here, blah, blah, blah. And then basically the whole company showed up, which was cool. So we had a little company outing. I didn't know what to expect. I heard that it was the course was kind of new and nice, and Tom Doak, I think even back then already had a bit of a good reputation, but it was quite one of his earlier ones, but he was like an up and coming architect. So I was looking forward to it for sure, but it was very cold. I remember wearing at least 3 layers. I think I had this like merino wool Adidas golf thing on that really made it kind of difficult to move. I remember like on the first tee, and then the worst part is like none of you have seen me play, so I was like, I could really just leave a terrible first impression by like topping it off the first tee box wearing like this massive sweater. But it's a par 5. It's pretty straight off the tee, and then it kind of goes up a little bit to the left, sort of a blind-ish second shot, I remember. And I also, by the way, had a brand new set of clubs because I obviously came from a different brand. I hadn't played Taylormade clubs before. Well, not right away before. I had Taylormade clubs back in the day, but I had a brand new set, so never hit them on the golf course. Actually, I think they were all basically in the wrapper still, like they were new clubs. So I'm on the first tee with my R7 425 TP.
Thank you.
10.5. And I remember thinking, I really just want to make contact and find it. Like that was my goal. Make contact and then find the ball would be like a win. And I remember I hit it pretty good. Like it was like a little fade down the right side of the fairway, and I was like, whew, I dodged the bullet on that one. That could have gone horribly wrong. And I remember I played with you, and I can't remember who else we played with, but I definitely played with you and maybe I don't know if you remember who we played with. Who was I think it was at least three of us, maybe four.
I've tried to block the entire hole out of my life, Tomo, but I thought I'd bring it up when I was next speaking to you because it got better from here.
It got better from here. So then I hit my tee shot, and then we went out there, and I was like, whew, got off the tee well. And my second shot, I remember not really knowing the yardage. I was trying to find out. There was no like stakes or anything, and I kind of eyeballed. I think I asked you, and you said, I think it's like maybe 180 to 190, and it was a little bit uphill. I think the wind was helping though, so I was like, oh, maybe I'll just hit a 6-iron and see if I can get it somewhere near the green. And I hit it, and it kind of went where I was trying to hit it, and it was a good hit. And I was like, okay, well, hopefully it's like near the green-ish. And then we woke up, and it's like 6 feet from the hole.
That's right.
And then I made the putt, and it was at a par 5, so I made an eagle on the first hole that I ever played in Australia. So that was kind of a cool start. That would definitely give me a little bit of a spring in my step for the rest of that round.
Do you know what's funny is that of that entire round, that's the only 3 shots of any. Like I can't remember who we were playing with, but I can actually see your 3 shots because each one, as it came out of the middle, hurt me that little bit more, and it only needed to hurt me 3 times because you only hit it 3 times, and one of them was 5.5 feet. But it was that first foray into Australia, because the pressure of standing on a tee surrounded by people that you don't know, understanding that everyone knows that you can play, but are they doubting me? I wonder what happens. Exactly. I wonder what happens. And then the sound that R47, the 425 TP made, the R7 425, with the Reax Rombax, I think it was. I mean, it was
stock shaft.
Yeah, it was special. So your first ever hole in Australia was an eagle. Get stuffed.
Exactly.
Tomo Bystedt. Now,
yes, that was great.
A little bit of design, and enough about talking about you. In fact, no, the whole thing is about you. So design 101, a little bit of the design process. So looking back, one of the things that I've been learning a lot more about over the last 6 months and 12 months, particularly, is about the craftsmanship of where golf was, and through a gentleman by the name of Ross Baker, who hand makes his own long nose putters and mashies and things, as they did back in the day. Are engineers today in any way different to the craftsmen back then, or are they just craftsmen with better technology?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences, I think, now versus then, and I have a little bit of a unique perspective on it too, because I worked with a gentleman called Clay Long, which I don't know if you know Clay Long, but Clay Long, he worked here at Taylormade for a little bit. He extremely skilled craftsman in golf, has been in the industry for I think 50 years plus. He built a lot of Jack's clubs back in the McGregor days, but he was one of the last people in the industry who did everything. Like he was a shaper. He did all the stuff by hand. He does his own CAD, CNC, grinding wedges, like he does everything from A to Z. Which I think the difference now is that it's more compartmentalized in the industry. Like you get people who are experts in a certain field, and part of that, Phil, is because the technology is so much more complex now than it was back in the day. It was more of a shaping exercise.
Yes.
The stuff that they did back even 30, 40 years ago, one guy here could do it. You could, none of that stuff was sort of out of the realms of somebody who was good with their hands and had
Yeah.
good eyes and had good golf sensibilities. Nowadays, you have to understand how to run all this different software and how manufacturing works and how to cast titanium, and now with how to make carbon faces. And you have to understand materials on such a deeper level that it's no longer like a one person thing. Like you need experts in everything. And then so like my role now is a little bit of like understanding all of those things while not necessarily doing any of those things myself, or very few of those things. Like the shaping part, obviously I do it myself, but mostly it's relying on people who are experts in each of those things and leveraging what they do to create the best product we can. And I think that's what the difference is nowadays versus back then, more than anything else.
So there's still a shaping element. I mean, there's a point where it's not all left up to modeling and computer modeling.
Correct.
There's still a hands-on, wow, I like that.
Yeah, I think golf is unique in that way. I think when you think about sporting equipment in general, if you think about, football or soccer or tennis or all those things, like you're not really looking at your equipment while you're playing it. Like you're looking at players and, where to pass the ball and where to throw it or whatever. Where golf is like you're staring at your equipment. Like before you're about to make the most important move in your entire day, it's like you're looking straight at what you're hitting with. So if something about that doesn't look right to you, it's going to throw you off. And I think that's where golf is kind of unique in that way, of that shaping aspect of it, the subjective element of the golf club design is such an important part of it. To your point about if it's all modeling, there's always some things that could be made a little bit more efficient if it looked ugly, in some respects. That's not the same as saying ugly things perform better. Which is like, so, and I say that because people are like, oh, well, maybe that's why square drivers didn't work. Well, square drivers didn't work because the science wasn't good, but shaping was also terrible. But part of it, like what we do here is like, we try to make sure that those things two marry up. It's like, we take the minimal amount of compromise in the technical aspect and the engineering aspect of the club, while making the best looking, the club that gives the player the most confidence, that's the easiest to align to the target, and all those things, sounds the best, and kind of put that all together.
Now, how do you strike the balance between developing completely new concepts or applying new technology to existing ideas? So in terms of saying, do we reinvent the wheel, or are we here just saying, actually, you know what, now that we have, and I'll use, and we'll get on to stealth later, but I'll use carbon as an example. Yeah. We couldn't do that before. Now we have this, so now we can. Because as was pointed out to me, a move weight driver existed in 1894, but they also had wood. They didn't have titanium and tungsten and and steel screws and the ability to press fit and all this. And they didn't have a lot of the technology they have now. So how much of it is applying new technology to an existing concept, and how much of it is actually saying, let's go in a new direction?
I think it comes down to understanding where you are on the technology S-curve, right? So have you heard of the S-curve, where it's,
I'm about to.
You have a new technology. Yeah. Whenever there's a new technology of anything, there is a kind of an early phase where the technology is kind of just becoming viable, right? So it's like electric cars. Like there was many years between the 1980s and really 2012 when Tesla Model S came out, where not much happened, and there was like a little improvement. It became slightly more viable during that time, but it was by no means mainstream. And that was on the sort of the early part of the S-curve that was slightly moving up, but not very quickly. And then when the technology became more mature, battery technology and so forth, then you get on the steeper part where now each iteration becomes significantly more efficient or better performing than the previous version. And that's a steep part of the S-curve. And then eventually you get to a plateauing period again, where the S, when you've extracted the maximum out of that technology, whatever, lithium-ion battery in the car example, just to keep using that example, you can only make that chemistry so good and get before you have to move on some other type of fuel technology to make the battery smaller and more energy dense, right? So I think the same thing happens with golf equipment. So wood had a long reign, but during the wood era, there wasn't a lot of technology that went into it. It was more like just making it slightly different shapes. And I think really when metalwood started, that's when really technology came into the game of understanding MOI, COR, all those things, and being able to predict durability and sound and all those things. That's when technology really came into the game. And so with golf, you have to understand again, where are you? And that's kind of what we did when we looked at things like the steel metalwood to the titanium one. Like steel, when we got to the early 90s, it was like, steel is so dense that you can't do much more with it than this. So we moved to tie, and then tie was on that same curve where the first 5 or 6 years of tie metalwoods, they weren't really that much better than steel. Between sort of 95 or not, actually 91 was really when tie started to sort of the late 90s. But then once you got into the 2000s, titanium just kind of skyrocketed, right? Like everyone was doing tie. Clubs were getting really a lot better every year because we were on that steep part of the curve. And then these last 3 or 4 years, it's definitely started to plateau where, you know, we're hitting limits of what the material could do. We couldn't go any bigger, obviously, with the rules. And that's when you have to recognize where you are in that curve before you jump to a new curve, right? And that's kind of, I think, when you said, hey, do we want to reinvent or refine? It's like, I think that the cutoff point is when you realize when you're on that part, which part of the curve you're on, essentially, is kind of your tipping point. And in order to transition effectively, you have to start that new one a little bit earlier. So that, when you jump onto this new curve, you're not in this like long flat period for 5 years where it's still not very good. So that's why for us with the carbon, I was saying we're going to get to stealth, but you know, we've had that for a while. Like we've been working on it. We launched that driver in Japan back in 2013. And so we've been working on it kind of in the background to avoid having kind of a long bottom of the S curve situation. Yeah.
So when we talk about, and there's a big push, and people don't always declare their self-interest, but about either rollback or bifurcation. The USGA have discussed limitations on length, or as people would say, length. There's been some discussion around, you know, is it about COR rollback, size rollback, or otherwise? How does that impact? How does bringing in rules and regulations impact on this whole concept of the S-curve? So as we're hitting the peak of development with titanium, because at 460 cc's and with the CT as it's required and with COR as it's required, we've hit the peak, and then all of a sudden the brakes are put on. Does that force a change in the S or promote thinking to start the next curve, you know, in that sort of chaos model, the next curve? Where does that, it's a really bad question, where does it sit or hit from an engineering point of view when the rules are changing?
So it's a pretty complicated question, obviously. And so let me try to like frame it the way that I interpret it, and in a way that I think I can explain my position on it. I think in general, rules can foster innovation. I think if there were no rules, I don't think we would have ended up with the face that we have, for example, because people could have just gone, hey, we're going to go really big. We're going to make these bigger faces and we're going to do all this crazy stuff. And you wouldn't necessarily have to innovate as much to extract the maximum. So I think rules can have that effect on a technology. And I think you see that more than anywhere in Formula One, right? You see these cars and they have tons of rules, but every year they go faster because these engineers are really smart and they figure out little things they can do that, again, if there were no rules, they were like, whatever, we're just going to put a massive engine on this thing and we're going to go. So I think the same thing with golf. Having said that, there are obviously situations with rollbacks and certain rules that could come in where it could also put brakes on it. Like you're working on some new technology that is going to take advantage of a part of the rules, or it's going to help extract more out of a certain part of the rules that they're now saying, oh, well, no, we're not going to allow any of that, right? And that could then obviously like, hey, we're not even going to go into that S-curve or that technology path. But more than likely, it will then force you to look at a different one to, again, extract the maximum out of the rules. So I think from an innovation standpoint and a technology exploration standpoint, whatever the rules are, there's still going to be innovation. We're still going to work on, and so, I mean, I'll give you an example right now, which is the CT rule, right? CT rule is not the same as the COR rule. And so all the manufacturers now have to think a little bit differently about designing the face of the driver. If there had just been a COR rule like there was, back in the old days, things would be different now in terms of how companies would have decided to invest in technologies around materials and face designs. So that's just one example, but that's definitely a big part of it.
And is it exciting? Is there a level of interest or the ears prick up as opposed to, oh no, they're putting rules in place or they're rolling it back? It's now is our time to earn some money. I asked Chris Foshell from Mizuno a similar question, but from an engineering point of view, if you're told you now have these tighter constraints, does it actually make you say, okay, now we get to really work as an exciting thing? Because I think there's this feeling that, let's put clamps on the companies and that'll put clamps on things, as opposed to we've got some of the great brains of the world in engineering working in these spaces. And I'm very big on golf. If the rules are rolled back too far and you lose an engineer to tennis, they're never coming back to golf.
Right.
And there's negative impact. So do the engineers get excited by the idea of limitations because it might open up, as you say, new directions?
Yeah, I think so. I think in general, the rules invite curiosity. Like you're like, okay, this door was closed. What other doors can we try to open to see what we could extract out of this technology? And to your point, really smart people are working on this. We have incredible engineers here at Taylormade, and they're all constantly trying to make things obviously be conforming and be legal, but at the same time thinking, hey, Mr. Average Golfer, how can we make him play better golf and not have to play non-conforming clubs? So I do think it's, on the whole, it's exciting. Obviously, there could be rule changes that put a damper on things quite a bit, obviously, and I'm not in any way promoting any rollbacks. But I think it's having a framework like the rules that we have. It challenges engineers for sure, and I think if there weren't challenges here, I think it would be less exciting for engineers to work here. And again, like when I think about some of the more recent things, and obviously because there happened more recently that popped into my mind, but like working on stealth technology, one of the things that was really cool, I was talking to one of our sort of probably the leading expert in-house here, Mark Greenia, on carbon technology, and he's been working on the carbon face since 2001. Like he's literally worked on this for 20 plus years, and he goes to these conferences for carbon fiber, around the world. I think they're in Paris usually every year. I don't know with COVID, but he'd go to these and he'd learn about what's the latest and greatest in the industry, what are other industries doing with carbon fiber and so forth. And one of the things that I think would have never happened had we not had these rules is the extent to which we wanted to refine this technology. Because, and I'll give you an example, Phil, about one of the ways that we have to make the face durable is to have no voids whatsoever in the carbon fiber. And carbon fibers, when you lay them up in shafts or whatever, they're somewhat prone to having tiny air bubbles in there. And Mark was telling me a story about how he went to a conference and he was looking for technologies to detect voids in carbon. So there's some sort of scanner, like ultrasound type stuff, like they can see inside the material and see, hey, no, we got an air bubble in here. That's going to be a problem. And, he would talk to people that work, with Boeing or with car companies. And they were like, yeah, no, we have scanners. We have this and that. And he said, well, how small a thing can they detect? And they said, well, it can go down to the size of like a penny. And we were like, and Mark was like, well, we need sub-millimeter detection. Penny is not good for us.
Penny's not so good.
Yeah, it's not so good for golf. And so he ended up finding a solution of a scanning technology that they use for microchips. Intel and these guys use it to scan microchips for defects. And so that's what we use on the stealth phases instead of the stuff that Boeing or Formula One teams would use to scan, much bigger carbon fiber pieces.
Because of scale.
Because of scale. And that's the crazy part about, and I try to explain stealth technology to people. It's like, yeah, it's carbon fiber, but it's not like anybody else uses carbon fiber. This is not like cut and paste from Formula One suspension system or a wing element from a Airbus or a Boeing 787. This is an entirely new thing. Again, why it's taking so long to develop. and you have to find new solutions. And again, I don't know if we would have gone down those roads had this whole thing been easier, and we didn't have as many rules, and we didn't have as many restrictions on what we had to do, and we had to try to extract, another mile an hour of ball speed or 2 miles an hour of ball speed. And these are the lengths that we go to do that. So it's pretty cool. It's fun to work on, to be honest.
Yeah. So I think sticking to stealth, I've got a couple of questions. One about sort of is the design story and the backstory, and I think you've covered a lot of that. Is that here was an idea that someone just grabbed and said, no, this is going to work. Just give me 20 years, but it's going to work. Have faith.
Yes.
But one of them is the importance of Japan, and you mentioned the fact that you released this driver in 2013, and the importance of Japan historically as almost a test market, because everything was so technical. And we think about from a Taylormade point of view, XR05 CTI or Glory. Exactly. I'm still not sure if you call it Glory because it's spelled a bit weird, or Gloire. But these models, and the fact that there was carbon face in Japan in a driver 9 years ago, does Japan still have the opportunity and still exist as that advanced technology market, or is it now so homogenous that's been taken away a little bit, and are we better for it? Because there was some cool stuff that was done for Japan historically that you just couldn't find.
Honestly, that's a really good question, and one I haven't really had before or even thought about much, but it is a good point. I think, one of the things that made Japan unique in the past, and I'll get to kind of the present, but in the past was, it was relatively isolated. So before social media, there was really no way for the average American golfer or Australian golfer to know what was sold in Japan, unless you went there and you went to a golf shop and you're like, oh, look at these clubs. These are crazy. So part of it was you could launch stuff there that was different from what you had in other places as a little bit of a test. And you mentioned a couple of clubs that were unique that we did, again, as a bit of a test. Without it sort of causing any ripples elsewhere, like, why are we getting those? And how come we don't have the XR05 CTI in America? No, like literally zero people asked that question. And so I think that's part of it, that it was isolated. The other thing was those kind of products are great for the Japanese market in general, because the Japanese consumer is very technical. They read very technical golf literature. They're almost obsessive about learning about their equipment, understanding all the little specs. If you look at Japanese golf equipment websites compared to Western ones, they have a lot more specs listed. Static weights of clubs, CG angles. Like, they have a lot of stuff that the Japanese consumer cares about that Western golfers haven't even heard about. So it also catered really well for that audience. So those two things together was like made it a perfect kind of test bed. And I would say the third thing was, in general, Japanese golfers, and of course I'm generalizing here, but they have slower swing speed than Americans or Western golfers. They're just small in stature. They're not as strong. So you could test things there that maybe were borderline in durability, and things like the carbon crown on the XR5 CTI. I'm not sure if we would have been super confident in launching that in the US. Now, I wasn't working here at the time, so I can't say whether or not it was. Maybe it was bulletproof.
I never
I'm not sure. Yeah. But, like, if you're going to put something out there that is really cutting edge, that's a good place to put it out there, because it's sort of, you can test it out and then see how it performs. And if you have a bit of an issue or it doesn't perform as well as you thought, it's not a big miss for the company. We can okay, well, let's not do that again. So that club that we launched, the XR05, that one didn't really have a successor. We didn't launch another carbon crown driver until the M1. So we were like, well, the benefit was pretty minimal back then, and the way that we were able to make the carbon crowns and additional cost, et cetera. So we didn't end up doing that. But and then fast forward to Glory 2013, again, very bold concept. It was a little different from Stealth in the sense that we were trying to make a very forgiving driver with a huge face. And we thought, hey, if we use carbon for this, we can obviously save a lot of weight and we can make a big face. So a little different idea, but basically, again, proving out the technology, not only from a consumer acceptance and consumer performance standpoint, but also from a manufacturing, like, how do we mass produce something like this, and is it even possible? So, but I think nowadays, when you think about how much more global everything is, it's a little more difficult to do that. Like, if you launch something in Japan now, everyone will know about it like the next day. So it's a little bit harder to fly under the radar. Like we deliberately, some of those projects, we didn't really market a whole bunch because we kind of wanted to keep that somewhat quiet a little bit. And even like, and you remember, I'm sure back in your Taylormade days, like we had all those iron sets as well that we did in Japan. Really cool forged cavity backs. Again, cool limited run. Price point would have been too high for Western market. It would have confused the lineup, I think, where we were trying to be a little more streamlined. But in Japan, those things really resonated with people. But if you look on our Japan website now, it's pretty much the same exact product as you get in other countries, except for the Glory line, like you mentioned. So catering to, again, a little different demographic than we have in other countries. But yeah, I do think that has gone away a little bit because of that reason.
So is there anywhere left that you can hide? I mean, like, has it taken away a really important development step, losing that market, or do you just find another way? Sorry, I don't want to get bogged down on this. Or do you just find another way of getting a job done, which is?
I think, honestly, we have such a more sophisticated testing method now that we don't really need to do that anymore. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, is that the way that we were able to simulate, I mean, obviously all the simulation software and stuff like that, and just the methodology of how to predict performance virtually is at a totally different level now than it was even 5-10 years ago. So that's a big part of it. But even with like human player testing, so we test, I would say almost every single day, we have player tests for different products, and we tested with different kinds of players. We don't always test with good players. We test with slower swing speed players and things like that too, to get the feedback that we would otherwise get from the Japanese consumer.
And how do I get my name on that list?
Just my number there on the bottom. Just call that.
Just ring someone who knows someone.
There's a couple of NDAs you have to be available pretty much every day on a weekday to hit balls. And you won't get paid. So other than that, it's great.
Yeah, right. I am in that unique position of being tall and a slow swinger. So what's the importance, therefore, with Stealth of tour validation? And it's interesting, the timing of your first visit to Augusta, with Scheffler getting the win with something you'd been so intimately involved with in his bag. But how important is that? How important is tour validation to the product? But also, how important was that to you personally to not only get its first tour win, but to see it win on what some would argue is the greatest stage or second stage after the Open?
Let's be straight. It is the greatest stage, just to put that out of the way first.
Yeah.
But no, I think it was very, I would say like the whole thing with Stealth here and within the walls of TaylorMade, I think that the sense was that this was the biggest group effort project that we had ever done. Like, this was because there were people that had worked on this that are no longer here, that we started this 20 years ago. And the amount of people in our R&D that have been involved with this over the years is a huge number of people. So there was definitely like a massive collective feeling of like, we're in this together, and this is kind of the result of a lot of hard work. And then, so for me personally, I felt responsible a little bit, like, hey, like, I really hope we get wins, and I hope tour players adopt this product. Because I think of myself as like, I'm running in a relay, and I'm kind of one of the last guys to get the baton, and I'm kind of running one of the last legs of that race. But so many people have got it to this point, and so it's hard to describe, honestly. Like, I think that the Masters for me had two sort of big highlights. One was seeing Tiger tee it up, and seeing him at Augusta was always a dream of mine, regardless of sort of what he finished or how he played or whatever. But just to see him out there and hitting the ball actually really well was so cool. And clearly that's what all the Augusta patrons are feeling like as well, because the crowds were like 10 times bigger around Tiger, whatever group he was in, versus anyone else's group. So clearly that's kind of where everybody felt. But also with Scheffler, and with Scheffler too, like, I've never worked with Scheffler. I don't know. I don't think I've ever even met him in person. And I obviously saw him at Augusta, but for him to come onto our team, and he's been, working with our team for a while. Like, he's played our clubs. He's played the TW irons for a while. He's played our driver in the past. He's played Sim. He's played fairway woods and things like that. And he's been in and out of them since he was a non-contract guy. But, he obviously wanted to join our team, and he's seen, the level of performance that he's seeing from other guys that came over from that kind of that no contract zone. Like Tommy Fleetwood, for example, who's really gotten a lot of support from our guys and really has been able to kind of really diagnose this game and get to the next level by having our team. So getting him on board and then seeing him at the Masters play so well, it was hard to describe, Phil. It was so cool. I didn't watch the final round in person. I watched it on TV, but it was still goosebumps, honestly, watching that happen. And then, the tour validation piece of Stealth was big. And I feel like it had already happened prior to the Masters, to be honest. I felt like the fact that all of our big players instantly switched to this product, and having worked on them last year, we showed this much earlier, by the way, to our tour players than normally. Normally we show them in like November, what our new driver is. And it's kind of a little bit of a surprise. This year, we wanted to be ready, make sure we hit the season, sort of hit the ground running. So we started back in like June last year. I think we already had prototypes where, we were able to get in front, so just to kind of warm them up to it and get early feedback and any kind of like last minute tweaks to the product that they needed. But so I knew as soon as like we hit Kapalua with Con playing the driver, and then as we got to the West Coast, Farmers, etc., tons of players were winning with it. Swafford won early on in the year, non-contract guys. So we had a lot of just really good successes early on. So I felt like that already kind of validated that it was not a gimmick, or it wasn't a kind of flash in the pan. So we were excited about that. But then obviously to get a major on the first try of a brand new technology, you couldn't write the script any better. And the fact that Scheffler had been on our team for 5 weeks, 5 whole weeks at that point, was kind of a Cinderella story, to be true.
And what strikes you, just the last question, particularly on Stealth, because I want to get into some name dropping, but what strikes you most about the driver? If there was one thing about the Stealth driver particularly, because the Fairway was a cracking, and I want to talk about products under the radar, but what's one thing that stands out to you with the driver when you first hit it?
Most people would say the sound is surprisingly good. I think a lot of people, when they hear it's got a carbon face, they feel like it's going to be muted, or it's going to be like other carbon things that they've hit before, and it's not at all. It's explosive sounding. It has actually quite a metallic sound to it. In many ways, like kind of signature Taylormade sound, which I think that's the first thing that certainly a lot of our tour players said when they first hit it, because I remember when we had Sergio, for example, hit it first, he saw it. He thought like we left a sticker on the face. He was like, "Oh, did you guys leave something on? Like, what is this?" And we were like, "Just hit it." We didn't tell him anything about it. And he was like, "Wow, this thing sounds really good." So I think that's the first thing that people, maybe it's just because it's a surprise a little bit, but it sounds fantastic. And then if your ball flight, it definitely comes off really fast. And then if you have the help of a launch monitor, that validates it pretty quickly. And so I've been privy now to probably 100 plus kind of fittings or seeing people getting fit, and just seeing people's eyes light up when they go, "I've never had 170 mile an hour ball speed before. Like, what's going on?" That sensation was super cool. And like having, again, so many people having that same experience. I would say those two things are the things that jump out for me.
So then last question, particularly on Taylormade, what product flies under the radar that from an engineering point of view, you're there knocking on marketing's door saying, give it something more than this, because you've got no idea how good this is?
Wow, you're really trying to expose a rift between me and the marketing team here, I can see.
I am, because I think they see things differently. And I recall a conversation many years ago that I've mentioned to you about having a conversation about golf balls when I was with Top Flight, about dimple patterns. And I had the conversation with their marketing guy that the wheel, Ferris wheel, and then one of the propeller heads. And so I got marketing, and then marketing left, and the propeller heads both said to me, looked at me and said, "That's not it. This is the answer." But it's not a cool enough story. So I don't want to expose a rift, but I want to know what product. No, I will expose a rift if I need to.
Yeah, I mean, that honestly, it's a pretty easy question, honestly, because and let me preface it by saying I don't think anyone's not doing this because they don't want to talk about it. It's just this is the nature of running a business like this, of having a ton of incredible products and having to allocate how you talk about them through marketing in the most efficient way possible. So I get it, but I think to me the most sort of underrated product is probably our Stealth Plus Fairway, our Thai Fairway. That club is insane. Like it's like people that that really know fairway performance and they've hit that club. And if you benchmark it, I mean, honestly, you can take this club into the hitting bay or to the range where the launch monitor with against any other fairway wood ever made, and it will blow its socks off. It's so good. And we don't really, we don't have a lot of bandwidth to talk about a fairway wood that, to be fair, is very expensive, right? There's so much technology in this club. It's never going to be like a super mainstream club where it's like everyone's going to go and get one. Like Rocket Balls was a little bit like that, but Rocket Balls was no more expensive than the other fairway woods out there, so it had great performance, and so a lot of people bought it. Yeah. This club is sort of that Rocket Balls moment of it just beats everything hands down. It just happens to be like $100 more expensive because of the technology in it. But it's it's funny when you go on tour and you look at people's bags, and again, we have, as you know, we have a lot less contracted guys than we used to have back in, again, when you were with Taylormade. And so our counts are reflecting that. But fairway woods are in so many people's bags that are either contracted to other companies or have no contracts, because on tour, it's not a very well kept secret, but everybody knows our fairway woods are the best. So that's one of those clubs that, again, if you really care about performance, if you care about distance, launch, trajectory, that club cannot be beat. And I think it looks and it sounds great on top of that, which is like the subjective things we talked about. But just from a sheer engineering, how low we can make that CG and how hot the face is as a combination, it's unbeatable.
Yeah, well, just so you know, I've had people from competitors reaffirm that. Now, onto some name dropping. Because there's not a lot to go, but these are the good things. Who's the best ball striker you've worked with?
I would say irons, Tiger for sure. And again, I don't want to come across too humble here, but I haven't worked a lot with Tiger. I've only been at tour shoots with him and seen him hit balls. It's not like I've been like, hey, Tiger, let's grind on your iron setup. I've just seen him hit balls. So, but as an iron player over the years, and obviously I've watched him mostly later in his career, and I know historically his iron game, statistically, if you look at all the numbers, has been obviously incredible. But we actually have a lot of really good iron players on our staff that I've been privileged to work with pretty closely, and guys like Rory. Rory actually is through the bag. His ball striking is insane. The other guy that I was really impressed with that I just worked with a little bit this last November for the first time, I just met him, was Lucas Herbert.
Yeah.
His ball striking with his irons is also on another level. It's so pure, and his trajectory control is amazing. Something to marvel at. I mean, the speed he has and how low he hits it, and just the right window, the speed control. He's on a different level too, I think, than a lot of players. I think I really admired what he could do with irons.
The king of lag. He's the king of lag, and he's coached Dom. He's a king of lag coach, because he's coached Dom as a party was ultra lagger, and you can just see the teaching and also the attitude and everything else coming through. Who would we assume hits it better than they do?
Oh, wow.
Not to get you into trouble, but
no, I mean, I think, when I think of that question, I like to frame it up as like, who's extracting the most out of their game, or their kind of natural ability. I think for me over the years would have to probably be Jason Day. I think Jason, he was good because he worked so hard at his game. And I don't think he necessarily had the natural talent of some of the other guys like Rory or Tiger, but he got to number one. His determination and, the difference when I saw him hit balls, and maybe he wasn't on top of his game, or was not even like, maybe not in game mode. He was just like, off weeks when we were working on something. Wasn't that spectacular, but then you watch them in a tournament, or you watch them warming up before a round at a major. I mean, he was incredible. So to me, that was a testament to like the focus that he has. And just, he impressed me a lot, just in his work ethic and just what he can do.
Who would cope best if all the rules were rolled back to 1979 and they could use metalwoods? But like who do you think who do you think would cope the best? I mean, that's probably one of my worst questions. And gee, I've asked some.
I think it's a tie between DJ and Rory on that one. I think you want to have somebody who can hit it pretty far, and who's hits it extremely solid, because obviously there was not a lot of forgiveness in clubs back then. So you need somebody who just finds a center of the face every time. The other guy actually who would do really well is Sergio. Sergio is a just incredibly precise ball striker, and I have a separate. We can talk about it some other time, maybe over a beer. I have a separate story of watching Sergio hit on a high-speed camera, and the level of precision. I don't know if did you see those videos where we had it on our website recently, where you see those like slow motion shots of the stealth face and the balls. There's one with Rory. There's a couple of ones. I was there when Sergio filmed his thing, and he would hit it within like a millimeter time after time, and he would say like, "Oh, I think I caught that high in the face." We would go back and look at the footage. It was like half a groove above center face. I mean, it was unreal how good his ball striking was. Like, there was nothing that wasn't out of the middle. Because we basically said, hey, we're going to use this. It's going to be very slow motion, 20,000 frames a second. You got to hit the dead center of the face, or you're going to see this whole thing going on. So we're like, hey, no problem. Boom, 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 5-6 shots. And again, not to name any names, but that wasn't everyone. So that was
don't put anyone in it.
No, exactly.
But I've got to make a note for Dav at Hook Media to invest in a camera that can get us 20,000 frames a second, because I think it'd be hilarious to see how much it does deflect for a 20 marker though. Because you spoke about glory. I don't want to take you back. You spoke about glory and the reason that the bigger face to make it more forgiving. For a 20 marker or a 25 marker or even a 10 marker to get this understanding of how much deflection is going on. Yeah. To then overlay exactly what it looks like if you can hit it pure time after time after time. I think it'd be fascinating. So I'm just going to make a note for Dav to purchase a 20,000 frames per second camera.
By the way, those cameras, it's a phantom camera. You can't buy them, but you can probably rent them. There's national security concerns with having those things because they're used for like missile testing and stuff like that.
Dav, you're going to have to get onto ASIO.
Yeah.
And who do you still... Sorry, last two questions. So best non-golfer or best non-golfer golfer? Best non-professional golfer that you've ever come across? And if there's not one, just dismiss that. I just wonder whether or not you get all these big wig celebrities coming through and you... That's my perception of your job, Tomo. Yeah. You just sit on the range and shake hands and kiss babies. To
be honest, I don't work with a lot of those guys, but I have had the good fortune of working with a few. And the one that springs to mind from recent experience was Ken Griffey Jr., who is probably not a household name in Australia. He definitely is a household name here. Obviously, Hall of Fame baseball player, incredible record in baseball, and he's definitely a legend over here. So he was here for a fitting, and as luck would have it, 3 or 4 other people were not available. So I'm sort of the D player that they call in.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got the good fortune to work with him, and he was a guy who I didn't know how good he was, and he's not like an incredible golfer where he's shooting like mid-60s or anything. He's around scratch. So he's a very good player, but the level of ball striking that somebody who plays baseball at that level can do is astonishing. You can have all the typical kind of like slight swing flaws that when you transition from one sport to another that you see with like cricketers, for example. Yeah. You're going to have the kind of traditional things that are hard to kind of get out of your golf swing because they're in the other swing, right?
Yeah.
So he has some of the baseball things like that, hits down on it a little bit, but he plays the P7MBs, which obviously are pretty hard to hit. And whenever I see somebody who is not a tour player with P7MBs, I'm always automatically skeptical of like, should you really be playing those?
Yeah.
Or is it more of a vanity play?
Yes, there you go.
He should 100% be playing those. Like, he did not miss the center of the face with a single 6-iron shot that we hit. And again, why is it surprising that a guy who can hit 100-mile-an-hour fastball can hit the middle of the face of a muscle back? I guess it shouldn't be surprising, right? So, but that was impressive. I mean, just to see somebody who's not a pro golfer never really missed the middle of the face. I only see that on tour. If he practiced more, I'm sure he could play some seriously competitive golf.
It is incredible. These multi-sport athletes are
insane.
Incredible. They are insane. That's probably the word.
Yeah.
Now I want to finish with this is the key thing. So last year we revealed the GolfBarons Cup. Mm-hmm. And the GolfBarons Cup is a new team event for anyone who doesn't know, whereby it's similar to the NFL special teams in that just as you have a punter and you have a quarterback and so people play positions. No one plays all positions. So in golf, we play all positions. The quarterback has to throw it to himself. So this is your team. You have a 5-man team. You have a driver who only drives the ball. You have an ironer. You have a shorter or a short game player. You have an escaper. And then you have a putter. So this is your team. And this is what the PGL, when it finally gets up, this is going to be one of their team events because they've already contacted me, potentially. I mean, about wanting to put this into place. Yeah. So I need to know who is going to be your dedicated, and only one person can take each spot. I want to know who your ironer is, who your driver is, who your shorter is. I need your escaper, and I need your putter.
Okay, so I'll go in the order that they sort of pop into my mind. Short game, definitely Tiger. I would have put him as the iron guy in his prime for sure. But I'm going to have to put Colin Morikawa as the iron guy, just based on how good he is today. You know, like out there today, Colin cannot be beat with an iron in his hand. He's so incredibly good.
Well, they are playing tomorrow, this team. So
yeah, so that leaves me with a putter, a driver, and an escaper, right?
Yes, the escaper, yes.
So the driver thing is really tricky because it's a really close fight between Rory and DJ. And if I'm picking today, I'm going to go Rory. I think Rory is the best driver of the golf ball on the planet today. I think he's just sheer athletic ability, what he can do with it, with the size that he is and how far he hits it is absurd. So I'm loving my team so far. Now I got to find the escaper and the putter.
You're going to need some salary cap room. That's what you're going to need.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go Scheffler for the putter. I mean, I'm going mostly off of his recent wins and how he putted at Augusta, knowing how ridiculously hard those greens are to putt on. Scheffler for putting. So that's my fourth one. Escaper, we have I would say a bunch of good guys. The guy I like, who's I think sneaky good at escaping. There's two guys that come to mind, Sergio and Fleetwood, and I might go, just to mix it up a bit, I'll go Fleetwood on that one. I think Fleetwood has a great imagination, good hands, and cool under pressure. He'll think his way out of there and won't get too flustered.
And you've just said that he's always in the crap, so he gets very good at it, which is which is fine. And then I will leave you. I want to ask one last question. If there was one player on tour that Taylormade does not have, that they could if they would, or that you could if you would, or if you're forgetting Taylormade, that you would want.
Yeah.
Who don't you have that you'd love?
Okay, so I'm gonna discount kind of up and coming guys that you might have not heard of. So current crop of PGA Tour players that we don't have that I would like to have on the team. One guy that I really like is Victor Hovland. I think great personality, great ball striker, great player. I think he would be an asset to anybody's roster of talent. I like him a lot.
This will come as no surprise to you.
And he may or may not use one of the clubs that I worked on with our team. So
we'll go with the male.
That doesn't color this answer whatsoever, but I just think he's a good guy. So
that name comes up with monotonous regularity, and I think there's a lot for any other emerging tour pro or existing tour pro. Yes. Just sit back and watch how he carries himself.
100%.
And he's the Arnold Palmer of the modern age. He's the Pied Piper.
And I think, honestly, when you look at the thing that I'm personally really proud of the fact that I feel like the people that we have on our roster also represents that. I think everybody that we get the privilege to work with here at Taylormade, I'm delighted to work with all of them. I never feel like, I got to put up with this guy's shenanigans. Like, and again, not to go back in the past, but that was not always the case. There was definitely players that was like, this guy's hard work and like overly picky about stuff. These guys are all super nice, super polite. They don't they're not all super chatty or whatever. But yeah, they're all really nice people. So that's great.
Okay, we just got to get Rory to stop throwing clubs. And on that note, we're going to bring this Tenuous Links podcast to a close. I want you to thank today's guest, Tomo Bystedt from Taylormade. Thanks, Tomo, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Phil. It's great to catch up with you again, even if it's in this format. Hopefully see you in person here pretty soon.
You're always welcome down here, and you're welcome to bring free stuff. Remember you can subscribe at golfbarons.com for all our show updates, podcast updates, and magazines and everything else. And on that note, Barons will close the podcast, and remember to add some swagger to your swing.